I thought about taking a look at a very important job in the ancient world. These are actually from some notes that I did. I know years back, a few years back, we did something on shepherds for the Brothers Weekend up in Ontario. That was really good. And then some of these notes here I put together was from a study weekend I did up at Schooley Mountain as well, kind of on this subject. I don't think I did this one with you, but whatever. If I did, it's a rehash. Okay, so shepherds in the ancient world, a very important job. It is mentioned throughout the scripture as a job that really was the backbone, particularly in the ancient world, ancient Israel. You know, you had two things that you usually did in the ancient world. The majority of people, 90% of the people, you're either going to be a farmer or you're going to be a shepherd, or a combination of those two things. And the majority of people did that. 95% of the people, 95% of the people lived a very simplistic, agriculturally based life. You know, the fact of the matter is the majority of people in this world too, I guess you could say, still do that in some parts of the world. Anyways, nomadic life, they move from place to place, and that's what nomadic means, right? You're not staying in one place. The ancient shepherds usually had an area that they would graze their flocks and go from one place to another. The shepherd was always there as well, kind of watching over the flocks, and we'll get into that as well. So what type of sheep, what type of animals were kind of part of the everyday life of the shepherd? Well, sheep, of course, goats, donkeys were very important during this time, cattle and camels. And just for a reference, we can take a look at a couple of these. In the 12th chapter of Genesis, and then there was one. So just in verse 16, talking about the wealth that Abraham had, and he had sheep and oxen and asses and maidservants and manservants and maidservants, she-asses and camels. And so this was all of the stuff that Abraham had. And we're going to see that as Abraham gets more wealthy and more powerful, he is going to acquire more donkeys, cattle, camels, that type of thing. And so how did they, you can think, you're like, well, how did they make a living? You just have a bunch of, animals that you're taking care of. Well, how did you make money off of this? And usually what happened was the sheep and the goats primarily were a food source, of course, right? Not only for the shepherd and his family and, maybe a larger tribe, but they were also a food source, remember, for some of the cities or the larger villages as well. And so, they were really, right now, and kind of with the corona and everything and the pandemic, there's been a lot of talk about the infrastructure in this country and how to keep it open and keep the food coming and the trucks and all that kind of stuff. Well, the shepherds were part of the, really kind of overseeing the food supply of the villages and of the city. So they were very, very important. And a good shepherd would always be with his flocks, right? A bad shepherd is not going to care about flocks. And so you didn't want a bad shepherd around, obviously. Job, we're not going to turn to it, but Job, in the first chapter of Job, I think it goes through all of the things that Job had as far as animals were concerned. And so the more animals that you had, the wealthier you were, because that was really, it was like the currency. You traded a certain amount of goats or sheep, that type of thing, for something else. They were owned privately, owned by families, and then, parceled out and used to grow crops as well, for these parcels of land. So you had land where you would, grow your crops, but also kind of outside of this area. This is where your sheep and your goats and that type of thing are going to graze. And so the public land, you're just kind of out and about, you're gathering, they're out there grazing, that type of thing. Now, in some cases, there's going to be conflict with these massive herds, right? Can anyone give me an example of conflict with sheep and livestock and that type of thing in Scripture? Boom. Okay, I'm glad you're sitting up front, Steve. Yeah, so Abraham and Lot, right? They both are very wealthy, and they have these massive flocks, tens of thousands of animals, and the shepherds are fighting over like control of the best grazing area, control of what other thing was a resource in the Middle East, still is, right? Water, right? The wells. I think we read recently in our readings about Isaac. Isaac digged one well, and the Philistines came and filled it in. He's like, oh, and he digged like 3 or 4 wells, and then finally they left him alone, right? So, there was a lot of, there's a lot of friction during this time. And then just lastly, right here, it was a rough, solitary life, right? You're out, you're sleeping outside, you're dealing with wild animals, you're by yourself, right? And I think this is one of the reasons why probably David brought along a musical instrument, right? I think he brought his harp with him and he kind of played that type of thing. So anyways, so just an example of this. We stay in Genesis, this idea of a rough, solitary life. And I'm thinking of Jacob and Laban here. And there's a great exchange. Let's see. Yeah, there's a great exchange in Genesis 31 with Laban and with Jacob. Jacob is going to take everything that he's tired of Laban and his nonsense, changing his wages, this whole thing. And, Jacob takes his family and all of his flocks. Remember, he becomes extremely wealthy. God blesses him, and he leaves. And so Laban takes off after him. So anyways, so he says, in verse 38, he says, this is Jacob to Laban. This 20 years have I been with you. Thy ewes and thy she-goats have not cast their young, and the rams of the flock have not I eaten. That which was torn of beast I brought not unto thee. I did bear the loss of it, in my hand didst thou require it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. Thus I was in the day the drought consumed me, and the frost by night, and my sleep departed from mine eyes. So, Jacob's kind of going through, all the hardship that he endured for Laban to grow his flocks, right? And so Jacob not only was handling his own flocks, he was also overseeing Laban's flocks as well, and he grew very wealthy. But this kind of gives you a little insight into some of the things that Jacob and a shepherd would be dealing with. It's very hot out. Well, you got to be out with your flocks, right? It's cold outside. Well, you got to stay, you got to watch over your flocks. And so it was a rough, solitary life. If we remember David as well, we actually looked at this last week. Remember, the bear and a lion? David was a great shepherd because I think that the account talks about David, a lion, I think, having a lamb in its mouth, and David goes and kind of grabs the lamb out of the mouth of the lion. So courageous, brave, strong. And, if you're a lamb or a sheep and there's trouble around, you want a shepherd like David, right? And Jesus is going to use this, too. We'll look at it. Jesus is going to use this, right? The hireling, the guy that is just getting paid to watch over the sheep. He doesn't have really a vested interest into the sheep. There's no real relationship there. But with the shepherd, a caring relationship grew as he spent time with these animals. A good shepherd is generally going to care for his flocks. And that's one thing that we'll look at as well. What type of attitude should we have? We're all shepherds to each other, right? What type of attitude should we have as a shepherd? What type of characteristics should we have as shepherds as well? And just a connection, to this day and age, right? We live in very uncertain times. There's a pandemic going on. People are in their homes. There's a sense of isolation. At least I feel it, right? I posted, half jokingly anyways, on Facebook about being a hug guy, right? And I miss that kind of, the hugs and stuff like that, and kind of the coming together of people. And it really hasn't been that long. So if this thing continues, I may need some, mental health help. Anyways, it's good to see everybody, even though I can only do this or elbows or whatever we're doing. All right. So some shepherds in the Bible, right? Cain and Abel. Cain was more of a farmer, right? And he brought the first fruits of his field. Abel brought the first fruits of his flock. Remember, Abel's sacrifice is going to be accepted. Cain's wasn't, and there's going to be obviously confrontation there. Cain is going to be extremely jealous with Abel. First murder is going to be committed by Cain. We already kind of talked about this. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They all lived nomadic lives, a lot like what's the group of people that live in the Middle East called today that live? What's that?
Bedouin?
Yeah, the Bedouins. Very good. They live a very similar life that really hasn't changed in 3,000-4,000 years, right? Still kind of living, going from place to place, and that's all that nomadic means. Tribal chieftains, right? Each kind of tribe is going to have a chieftain that is going to oversee the family, oversee all of the flocks, and that's what Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were. They really were, they were chieftains, nomadic chieftains in this area. Conflict over grazing, we already talked about that, right? Abraham and Lot. Jacob and Laban are going to have conflict as well. So we don't have to look at these, well, all of them anyways. But just look at Genesis 15 and just kind of talking about Abraham here in the 14th. 15, Genesis 14. Yeah, just the idea of, and also that in verse 14, and also shall they come out with great substance. And so that idea of substance right there is talking about all of the animals that they're going to have when they come out of Egypt. And then Genesis 18, 18:20. 18:20, forget about that one. That doesn't make any sense. I don't know why I have that one down there. Okay, let's see, Genesis 26. 26 and 12. Yeah, so in verse, the wealth of Isaac in verse 12. Then Isaac sowed in the land and received in the same year an hundredfold, and the Lord blessed him. And the man waxed great, and he went forward and grew until he became very great, for he had possessions of flocks and possessions of herds and great store of servants, and the Philistines envied him. And we had already kind of talked about that, right? Philistines are going to be jealous of the wealth of Isaac. But not only wealth, he's going to sow in the land. He's going to have land that he is going to, grow crops on. Jacob is a shepherd we talked about, and Moses as well. Remember, Moses, that was his job when he fled to Midian. He starts off as a prince in Egypt. He flees from Pharaoh after he kills the Egyptian taskmaster, and his job is a shepherd. And I believe anyways, that time as a shepherd, when he was in Midian, really prepared him to be a leader of the Israelites, right? And it also humbled him as well. Remember, when he was a prince in Egypt, I don't think Moses was a very humble guy. I think he acted like an Egyptian prince, right? He makes his own decisions. No one's going to tell him what to do. But through the process of him fleeing from Pharaoh, through the process of being a shepherd in Midian, it changed his character. And he became a very humble individual. And this is where the burning bush is going to take place as well. Remember the sheep, he's going to be following after the sheep. So some very important people have the job of a shepherd. And when we look at the Old Testament and the New Testament, the shepherd is going to be the foundation of a lot of principles, a lot of good characteristics, the good shepherd, that type of thing. We'll look at some of these as we go on. Any questions so far on the shepherd and the importance of the shepherd in the ancient world? There's a lot of money tied with this, by the way. Your wealth is tied to the size of your flocks, right? And so when we're talking about a shepherd, really, you're overseeing a resource, a very important resource in the ancient world. So there's a lot of responsibility. We look down today, in a very complex world and say, shepherd, you needed to have a good head on your shoulders. You needed to, understand, the sheep and how, where they went, that type of thing, where the best grazing was. But also, when it was time to, for breeding purposes, all that kind of stuff. There was a lot of thought that went into this, the management of flocks. All right.
Rich, what do you think about the sacrifices of the animals? There were so many.
So that, that was probably a portion of the shepherds keeping the sheep.
Yeah, yes, for sure. So, as Israel kind of grew and their culture grew and their civilization grew, it became more complex. So when the temple or when the tabernacle was first set up, you needed a constant flow of flocks for your animal sacrifices. And this is even going to grow more once the temple is going to be established, right? Because Solomon is going to dedicate the temple, and I think the words that are used in the account in Kings is like they couldn't even keep track of the amount of flocks in the amount of cattle and animals that they sacrificed to God. So that kind of gives you an indication of the wealth that was in Israel at this time, and the wealth of Solomon as well.
And he had a gate that was dedicated to the sheep. They called it the sheep gate.
That's right, and that's where they brought in all of the flocks to be. Thank you, Steve. To be slaughtered and offered. So yeah, it's a good connection there, Sandy. Thank you.
So, Rich, when you talk about the management of the shepherd, what do you think about the parable that Jesus talks about regarding leaving the 100 to go find the one lost sheep? It seems so counterintuitive in some ways.
Yeah. So it is because you're leaving behind the 99. Open for predators or whatever. Who knows where they're going to wander off to just to get this one sheep. But I think Jesus purposely does that, right? God cares for us on such an individual level that the good shepherd is going to go find that one sheep and bring them back. But yeah, it is counterintuitive, isn't it? Yeah. All right. So, enemies of the shepherd. Shepherd is going to have some enemies. Shepherd is going to have some obstacles that he is going to have to avoid or have to deal with, right? So number one, terrain, valleys, rocks, ridges, gorges, ravines, right? Sheep make mistakes when they're traveling, right? They're not perfect. They're going to fall. They're going to go in the wrong place. They're going to fall into ravines, that type of thing. And so this you had to know the area. You had to know the topography of where you were grazing. Again, just another thing you have to kind of keep in mind. Now remember, this stuff is not going to be written down, right? You're not going to have a manual of how to be a shepherd and just turn to page 6, All of this stuff is going to be passed on from father to son or, from one family member to the other. All the tricks of the trade. And so you can imagine, too, a father bringing his sons or his sons out to show them how to be a shepherd, right? And to show them, the do's and don'ts of being a shepherd. This also, brothers and sisters, was a job that younger boys could do, all right? And so, David did this when he was younger, but this traditionally was done not only by older people, but younger boys could do this as well and watch over the flocks. And so this was like kind of the first, I wouldn't say it's a rite of passage, but it's like your first big responsibility. I'm going to be a shepherd today by myself. I'm going on by myself, right? And so, there's a lot of stuff that they had to deal with, right? So the topography is one of them. Number 2, wooded areas that made good hiding spots for predators, right? Jackals, wolves, lions, bears, oh my, right? So you had a lot of predators out there that were looking, you see 100, 200 sheep in one 12-year-old boy and you're a lion, you're like, jackpot, right? So you had to, you're a kid, 12, 13 years old, you had to be on your toes. You had to be courageous, and think about how scary that was, right? You're out there. I know I'd be scared as 12 years old and I'm out there and all of a sudden I see a lion trying to get a sheep. So you remember that we don't have to turn to this, but in Genesis 37, what was the story that Joseph's brothers told Jacob? Remember, they brought him his coat of many colors, and they had dipped it in goat's blood. What did they say to their father? This is really a real jerk move, by the way. I mean, oh man. Remember who's it?
Wild animal.
Yeah, wild animal. Remember, wild beasts of the field. Now imagine, this is just an aside, but Imagine telling that to your dad and then seeing him just so distraught for days and he couldn't even be comforted, right? And you know it's a big lie. You know, you sold your brother down to Egypt. Awful. Awful. I think it just kind of puts in perspective Joseph's forgiveness of this whole thing, right? Just shows you the character of Joseph.
He's getting them back for passing them over, right? The older brother, the younger brother got the bennies, so the older brother's gonna get.
Yeah. Well, the coat of many colors that's right. It was a symbol of my inheritance, my blessing is going to this guy. He's my favorite.
It's like Ben and Nathan getting stuff before you, right?
Well, right. It's old family and it's new family, right? New family, got a little more stuff than old family. They will never know the joys of driving up to New Hampshire to go camping with all the stuff in a Volkswagen Beetle, and you're just crammed up to the top. It was great, good time. Hopefully, my dad's watching. John 10 again. We don't have to look this up, but bands of thieves. Jesus is going to use this as an example of a good shepherd and a hireling, right? You see a band of thieves coming, and you're just getting paid. Bye, right? With a shepherd, he's going to stand his ground against these thieves and protect his flock, because again, there is a personal relationship with the sheep. He's got to protect it. They're his. He has an obligation to protect these sheep. Now, just think about that.
To the point where it says in John 10, he'll lay down his
He will
life.
lay. That's right, Steve. That's right. He will give his life for sheep.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the mindset of a good shepherd, and that's a great exhortation, isn't it? It's a great exhortation for us. But again, particularly in this day and age, right? It's different. It's a different. It's a little more. I think a little more complex. It's a kind of a different setup now, but we still need to be shepherds to each other. There's still people out there that need help, that need, particularly like our older members, right? They're kind of in isolation right now, given, they have to stay inside. This is where a simple phone call, would be great to hear from someone. Just kind of checking in with everybody, I think it's important, particularly for this time, because you can get isolated very, very quickly, and isolation it's not a good place to be. Jim, you were going to add something?
Yeah, so I just remember in prep for that Ontario Brothers class.
Oh, yeah, you had some good stuff. Yeah.
So this book that I read in prep, it was written by a shepherd, and he described how he knew his flock. He recognized this sheep, and the offspring of that sheep was this one over here.
Yeah.
And he knew where that one was born and what the conditions were.
Right.
And it was amazing. It was just like a family member.
Yes.
That he was describing his flock was maybe not beloved, but he knew them. He really knew where they came from, their history. He knew all of them.
Yeah, no, I remember you talking about that he had this incredible wealth of knowledge about his sheep. So, a good shepherd knows his sheep. And what does that word know mean? Well, I think he just talked about it. He knows every aspect of these sheep. That sheep over there, that's his son over there. They knew the connections. And then just along those lines, Jimmy, imagine the physical condition that you have to be in as well. Being outside all the time, walking constantly up and down, in meadows, up and down hills, that type of thing. Maybe, you got to deal with an issue here, there, everywhere. You had to be mentally tough, but you also had to be physically tough too.
They got their 10,000 steps in?
Yeah, probably like by 8 in the morning they had 10,000 steps.
There were no 235-pound shepherds.
Correct. Oh, you're a little large for a shepherd. And then lastly, marauding bands of Amalekites, Midianites, and Philistines, right? So there were other people out there. Again, you're out there on your own. And, maybe the Amalekites are coming down. It's an easy way to get some sheep, right? You see a young kid, or just one guy out there with sheep, So
I never thought of that. Like you read about like in the Judges, how they would come down into Israel and they would take all the crops.
yeah.
But if they're doing that, surely they're
Absolutely
doing
taking
that
the
for
sheep as well. Right. And that's why, when we talk about the spoil and stuff like that, they got all this stuff, like all the sheep and everything else. They got it from going into Israel or other places and just grabbing all of the resources and taking it with them. So, yeah, I mean, hey, if you can take some wheat, you can take some sheep too. So, yeah, there was all, you know, this wasn't an easy job is what I guess I'm trying to impress upon everybody. All right, so the daily life of a shepherd. What was the life of a shepherd, right? Awoke at dawn, right? To call all the sheep together. Each sheep had a name. I found this interesting. Usually named after a flower or a fruit or something like that, right? Hey, Peach, you know. Hi, Rose. Hi, Crocus. You know, I don't know. Anyway, so the given name. So just again, just think about kind of the relationship, right? When you give something a name, I think it changes the relationship psychologically, right? You actually give something a name. It becomes personal. And so you
And
give.
wouldn't they know the voice of the shepherd? They would know who's calling them, so they would be a relationship back and forth.
Yeah, absolutely. They would hear the voice of the shepherd. They're like, oh, you know, and so they call them together, or whatever they would use, and they would all come together. The sheep know. So if I was the shepherd and Jim tried to call the sheep, don't care.
You know?
Just listening to my voice, kind of like, you know, my cat, you know. Come in, he's, you know, he gives me some fake affection and he wants to get fed, you know. That's all. All right. You know, they led the way looking for grazing areas, the safest path, right? You know, I'm guessing that some of these grazing areas that maybe hadn't been used were a little more difficult to get to, right? Israel, we know, is a hot and dry climate. Water is key, so you had to know where the streams were, where the wells were, that type of thing. And so, you know, watched over the young lambs who were struggling to keep up with the older. You know, imagine you're a lamb, you're born, and all of a sudden, you know, you got about, you know, 45 minutes to an hour to get on the feet and get them working. You know, it was no joke. The poor little, you know, you see some of these nature shows, you know, like an elephant or a giraffe, they're just being born, or a wildebeest or something. They can't even stand up, and the mother's like, "Listen, you got to get going." Yeah. So it was, you know, it was not, you know, you didn't have a lot of time. You had to get ready. You had to get ready. And then, you know, they would build little. I probably should have made this bigger, but. You know, like a sheep cote, right? They would build a, you know, like a little structure right there. Oftentimes in the, you know, in a cave or something, or if they're out, they would just kind of. In Africa they call them bomas, and they keep the wild animals away. And so you're inside with all of, you know, the things that you want to protect to keep them from animals. So this way you can actually get a good night's sleep. Thank you, Steve. Knowing that your you know, your sheep are being protected. And usually with larger flocks, you know, you would have maybe a servant with you or a couple servants just to kind of manage all of this. So again, not an easy job. And by the way, when people were in the ancient world would talk about shepherds, they knew right away. It would be kind of like us saying, you know, as an example, like a firefighter or a policeman or something like that. We know exactly what is entailed with that, right? There's downtime. There's a lot of downtime as a firefighter, but then all of a sudden the stress level goes right through the roof if you're dealing with an accident or you're dealing with a fire or something like that, an emergency, right? And I think the same thing with the shepherd is. I bet there were kind of some days was kind of long and dull and boring, right? But then all of a sudden you got to be on your toes because there's a jackal over there or a wolf or something like that, or you see somebody that is not, it shouldn't be there. And then again, just as an aside with Joseph, remember Jacob sent Joseph to go up to Dothan to see what his brothers were up to, right? So they were far away from actually where Jacob was, and so Jacob wanted to know what was going on. I'm guessing he probably heard stories that, you know, probably wasn't the best situation up there, and so they would travel large distances to find good grazing. And this is where you have a lot of the conflicts, particularly during dry times, during times of you know, drought, where, you know, obviously, you know, you don't have enough water, you know, grass is going to die, that type of thing. So.
Yeah, the brothers had to separate, right? Because there wasn't enough
Space for them to
That-
both be in the same place.
Right. Yeah. And this-
You take this part, I'll take that part.
Right, and so yeah, and I guess Jim, gives us a little insight into the size of these herds, right? The size of these flocks, right? And that's what happened with Abraham and Laban. Not Abraham and Laban, Abraham and Lot. Remember, Lot saw the well-watered lands, the valleys where Sodom and Gomorrah was, and he's like, oh, I have first pick? Yeah, I'm gonna go right there. And come to find out, it was a bad pick, right? He looked at it and he said, this is great for my flocks, but eventually, the slow progression of it. Remember, he looked at Sodom, then he was sitting in the seat of Sodom at the gate, and then, he's living among the people in Sodom. So, urban life got Lot. I think Lot became a very wealthy man, and he probably he bought a home inside of the city. He was at the gate. He was a wealthy guy, and he was well respected, and that was the slow progression of it. Okay, so importance in the law. The law. If you look at Leviticus and you go through all of the things in there, it's all about sacrifice, right? When to sacrifice. Was it a lamb? Was it a sheep? Was it a goat? A bullock. There was all kinds of rules and regulations, and every single day there were probably hundreds, if not thousands, of sacrifices that are happening at the temple, right? Individuals are bringing sacrifices. There's collective sacrifices for the children of Israel. And so this was a very important part of it. And so when someone says, hey, I brought a sheep as a free, or a lamb as a free will offering, you were given something of your wealth to God, right? It's just like taking out a $20 bill or something like that. Probably, a sheep, who knows how much I don't know how many shekels they were worth, but, you were giving something to God as a sacrifice. And so, number one, you're giving something to God for a sacrifice. But number two, these also, what did the Levites do with the meat, right? That was sacrificed. Did they just throw it away? Yeah, it was a way of providing sustenance to the Levites. Right, and that was another commandment under the law, that you were to take care of the Levites as well. Passover lamb, right? That was big. So, the Passover lamb. Passover obviously happens in the springtime. When do sheep have their babies?
Spring.
Right in the springtime.
Spring.
Springtime. And so the same thing. So just imagine the lambs that would have to be used at Passover. All you animal lovers out there, this probably wasn't the best place for you. Animals were protected under the law. Okay, and let's just look at this here. 21. 21 and 1. I don't know. Yeah, in verse 33, it shouldn't be 21 and 1. That makes no sense. If a man, 33, sorry. If a man shall open a pit, or if a man shall dig a pit and not cover it, and an ox or an ass fall therein, the owner of the pit shall make it good and give money for the owner of his, and the dead beast shall be his. So, there were rules and regulations surrounding the management, the good, orderly management of animals, because they were worth. They were wealth. They were money. And again, obviously, source of wealth, blessing from God as well. It was an indication that God was blessing. In Deuteronomy 28, I think it's the blessings and the cursings. It talks about God would bless your flocks, would bless your family, would bless everything that your fields as well. All right. What do we got here for time? Okay, we're all right. We're good. Okay, so be thou diligent to know the state of thy flocks. That is from Proverbs. That is an awful way to spell Jeremiah, by the way. Look at Jeremiah. Okay.
Who's your editor?
Yeah, who is? I blame it on my editor.
Spell cheater.
So prophets reminded the kings of this, right? That they were shepherds. They had an obligation and responsibility to watch over the flocks, to watch over the people, right? And so just we'll look at Ezekiel 34. Actually, before we do this, let's look at where this comes from. Be thou diligent to know the state of thy flocks. Proverbs, what?
Proverbs 27.
Yeah, thank you. Proverbs 27, thank you. Yes. Verse 23. So be thou diligent to know the state of thy flocks, and look well to thy herds. For riches are not forever, and doth the crown endure to every generation? The hay appears, and the tender grass shows itself, and herbs of the mountains are gathered. The lambs are for thy clothing, and the goats are the price of the field. And thou shalt have goats, milk enough for thy food, for the food of thy household, and for the maintenance of thy maidens. So, God through Solomon is telling us that, know what's going on with your flocks. Know what's, handle your business. Know what's going on with your wealth, with your family, with your ecclesia, right? Be tuned in. Have a relationship. And he goes on and he explains why that's important. Well, in a very literal way, goats, they would get, milk from it. They would make cheese from it. So it was a way, obviously, to produce things that would sustain your family or your country, your tribe, that type of thing. And so the same thing applies to us as well. Building relationships with people in our lives, important relationships, whether it's in our families, but also spiritual relationships. Having true love for each other. Being diligent to know the state of the people that we are close to in our ecclesia. Do we know each other? What's the relationship we have with each other, right? And this is one thing that I do, many things that I love about this ecclesia, We spend a lot of time talking to each other, both in these halls and outside of these halls as well. So I think that's a great thing. That's a sign of a healthy ecclesia. And we should continue doing that. Okay, so we're not going to look at all these.
And more so now.
Steve, absolutely, without question, more so now. We're just kind of beginning this process too. And the thing, with this, not to go down a rabbit hole, but we go from, human beings are very social people. Okay, we're social creatures. We need that interaction, that physical contact. Jim's like, no, you don't. And so now, all of society has been, we're in lockdown now. And I think it's, next couple of weeks, I think it's probably only going to get worse, right? Until this thing passes, hopefully. And we don't have an end to it as well. That's the other thing. Like, how long is this going to last? So this can be very trying mentally, physically as well. You're not getting outside as much. So I recommend everyone in this room and everyone online as well, find some time if you're isolated now to make some phone calls, number one, but take care of yourself, right? Get out and go for a walk. I find that going for a walk, a couple miles, 3 miles, does wonders, not only for my body, but for my mind. It really helps my mind. Because we're not meant to be cooped up in a house, for hours and hours at the time, right? So that's a great point, Steve, absolutely. All right, so Ezekiel 34. Now, just keep this in mind, with Psalm 23, right? It says, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. We all know it, right? He makes me down the line of green pastures, right? He leadeth me by the still waters, right? So God as a shepherd is always looking out for our best interest, okay? He's bringing us, he's bringing us into the pastures. He's giving us food. He's bringing us to the still waters. We can drink as much water as we want, right? Now, let's compare it to what the human shepherds were doing in Israel during the time of Ezekiel, right? Verse 2, Son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Woe to the shepherds of Israel that do feed themselves. You eat the fat and you clothe you with the wool. Ye kill them that are fed, but ye feed not the flock. The diseased have ye not strengthened, neither have ye healed that which was sick, neither have ye bound up that which was broken, neither have ye brought again that which was driven away, neither have ye sought that which was lost, but with force and cruelty have you ruled them. So, wow, what an indictment by God on the leaders of Israel at this time. You're doing everything for yourself. You're using the people to gain wealth, to gain power, to gain control. Here's the other thing, as far as responsibilities of a shepherd, okay? The diseased have ye not strengthened. So I'm guessing that a shepherd needed to know some maybe medical treatments, right? How to set a broken bone maybe, right? Bind that up. Maybe what type of herbs would maybe help with, some type of, maybe a skin disease or something like that. Disease was a big problem back in the ancient world. Remember, there was no cure. Pandemics, happened all the time. And they killed tens of thousands of people without getting too gloomy about it. Millions of people, actually. Anyways, heal that which was sick. That was the job of a shepherd, to heal that was sick, to help the sheep that had diseases.
That's what I think it means in the 23rd Psalm when it says, anointed our head, with his head with oil.
Yes.
I mean, that was, as from the perspective of the sheep, that was to keep the flies out of its eyes.
Yes.
It was a medical thing.
Yes, great connection, Steve. Thank you. Yeah. So a good, so God as the shepherd is really doing all of the things that the leaders of Israel at this time were supposed to be doing. Anointing the sheep's head with oil, keeping the flies away, making sure there was no disease, making sure that the sick were being taken care of. Broken bones were set, were healed. If the sheep were driven off, you brought them back again. Have ye sought that which was lost? If there was a lost sheep, you went out and looked for them. Okay? But what were the leaders of Israel doing at this time? They were ruling the people with what? Force and cruelty. Now that's an indictment, right? Okay, so that's what that's not good. You never want to say, to have something said about you that you use force and cruelty when it came to your interactions with people, right? That's not words you want to be said about, Rich Deneen or, Peter Davis. Yeah, Peter, he was a forceful realtor and he was very cruel. He was very cruel. Peter, you're the opposite of that, buddy. All right. Yeah, so let's take a look at verse 12. As a shepherd seeks out his flock in the day that he is among his sheep that are scattered, so will I seek out my sheep and will deliver them out of all places where they have been scattered in the cloudy and dark day. Oh, wow. So, again, God is the opposite of what the leaders of Israel were doing, right? And he's using this as an example. You've been scattered to different parts of the Middle East. After Samaria fell and after Jerusalem, they're in Babylon right now, in the land of Babylon. And so God is saying, you've been scattered in the dark day. I am going to gather you again into one place as a good shepherd, right? Verse 14, I will feed them in a good pasture and upon the high mountain of Israel. Let's see, verse 15, I will feed my flock and I will cause them to lie down, saith the Lord. I will seek that which was lost and bring again that which was driven away, and will bind up that which was broken, and will strengthen that which was sick. But I will destroy the fat and the strong. I will feed them with judgment. So there you go, and so just keep that in mind, with Christ. Does Christ fit the bill of a good shepherd right here? He was out amongst the people constantly. Jim and I were talking about, Christ was always with the lepers, right? He touched the lepers. He made himself unclean for a host of different people in order to save them, to take away their ailments, all while preaching the good news of the kingdom of God. And that kind of coincides with Isaiah, the 61 chapter, right? Binding up the brokenhearted, right? Strengthening the weak, setting captive those that are prisoners, right? These are all the characteristics of someone with a wonderful, loving heart for his fellow man. And so that's our expectation. What type of shepherds are we going to be, right? Right now, we need good shepherds. Right now, we need people to care about each other, to love each other, to build positive, strong, loving relationships with each other. We live. It's an uncertain. It literally is an uncertain time. We don't know what the end of this is, and we have complete faith in God that He has our best interest in heart. But it still can be difficult not knowing, right? We like to control things as a species, right? We like the illusion of control, let's say. Okay, and so when that's taken away, and we're just kind of sitting in our house, we don't know when this whole thing is gonna blow over. It can cause a lot of anxiety. A lot of kids that I work with online, they already kind of are dealing with some social emotional stuff. Now add to this a pandemic. You can imagine that the anxiety level is through the roof, right? And same with teachers as well. Everybody is a little on edge. So let's be good shepherds, not only now, but going forward, okay? Let's build those positive relations. We see someone in need, let's help them out. Just as God in Psalm 27 is that good, loving, strong, caring shepherd. Comments?
Amen.
All right.